Hello there, folks. Welcome to Product Tank London. Thank you very much for joining us wherever you are, especially on today, and happy World Product Day to you all. A great celebration of this fantastic community that we are a part of. If you get down to worldproductday.com, you can see a whole bunch of different ways to get involved and further connect with all of the fabulous people that are part of Mind the Product Tank, and everywhere. There's some a networking room on there that's being hosted on Wonder, and we've got up something like 50 product tanks happening across the globe, so you can see some fantastic content and get involved in some fantastic conversations. So please do go to worldproductday.com to find out more. Lots of ways to get involved in Product Tank and Mind the Product throughout the year. If you have a topic you'd like to speak on, or if you'd like to host a Product Tank, then please do get in touch with us either on Twitter or email, or go to mindtheproduct.com. We're also always looking for people to write about topics that are close to their hearts. So again, let us know if you've got an idea and would like to have the conversation that way. And finally, you can become a member of Mind the Product by going to the website, and the join section gives you fantastic access to loads of experts, loads of content, loads of member-only content, and will really help you level up your career and, far more importantly, meet some fantastic people along the way. So today's session at Product Tank London is all about how to do product discovery whilst also delivering. It's something that always comes up whenever we ask people about what are some of the things they find hardest in their day-to-day lives, and we have got some excellent speakers to share their thoughts on it. As we're going through, please do drop us a question or upvote some questions that you'd like to see asked on slido.com. We'll keep this code running throughout the whole session, so just go to slido.com and enter that in and be part of the discussion. So as I say, we've got three brilliant speakers today, all pulled together by the fantastic Eli Montgomery, who is head of UX at Kazoo. Eli also kicked off World Product Day by speaking at New Zealand something like 12 hours ago. So, and I think he's speaking again in Hamburg this evening as well. So you couldn't have someone who's a bigger part of World Product Day looking after us today. So we are very, very glad to have him. Eli, thank you for everything, and over to you.
Cool. Well, thank you so much to all the folks who are tuned in and attending. It's great to be with you today. Happy World Product Day to all the product people. I am super excited to introduce the panel of speakers that we have today for this event. We're going to start with Lisa Mo Wagner, who is a product person focused on inclusive product management, and will be sharing some thoughts on JEDI product discovery and delivery. So let's hand over to Lisa.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, let's talk about JEDI discovery and delivery. I have been passionate about diversity and inclusion for a long, long time. And you might wonder, what do JEDIs have to do with that? And also, is Star Wars really the best example for that? We'll look into it a little more and find out together. So let's get started. What is JEDI? It's actually an acronym, and it stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And you might have seen this little comic at the bottom there in one way or another. And I just want to quickly go over definitions here so that we're all on the same page. Let's start with diversity. Diversity describes all the differences between us based on which we then experience advantages or encounter barriers to opportunities. So diversity isn't just about racial differences, for example. Inclusion means fostering a sense of belonging by centering, valuing, and amplifying the voices, perspectives, and styles of those who experience more barriers based on their identities. Now, for a long time, we've talked about equality. And this you can see in the first little picture, where equality is just giving everyone the same, but it doesn't create the same opportunities. So we're looking at equity, which means allocating resources to ensure everyone has access to the same opportunities. So it actually recognizes the different advantages and the existence of all the isms. And then justice is just going another step further and dismantling those barriers to resources and opportunities in society so that actually everyone, all individuals, all communities can live a full and dignified life. Let's, put in some Star Wars quotes here. Yoda said, deceive you eyes can, in the Force, very different each of you is. A lot of the time, our first thought goes to gender and then maybe race when we think about diversity. And that's just literally the tip of the iceberg. And it's okay. It's good that we're all different and that we all bring different perspectives. For example, I might have some barriers because I'm a woman, but I'm also an able-bodied cis white woman. So I do have a lot of privilege. And those might be things that you can potentially see, but there's a lot more that you potentially cannot see. This iceberg here is just like a bit of a representation. There are only some examples. It is not an extensive list, but just think about the dimensions of diversity that are visible and then all the ones that are not visible. So why is this all important, actually? How does that come back to actually building products? A really important aspect of this is something that I fairly recently learned about, and it's called design justice. And it is very, very easy for us to think that we just know everything. We assume, and we've probably been building products for a while now, so we assume we know what people want. This always makes me think of this, like, not actually happened in that exact way quote by Henry Ford, where people are like, well, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. But how do you know that they would have said that? How do you know? So design justice means you want to design with your users and not for them. Teresa Torres recently did a talk about how to combine JEDI principles with her specific discovery framework, which is an awesome talk, highly recommended. And in it, she said, we are experts in technology, but our customers are experts in their own lives. So they actually know their own needs, their own pain points, and their own desires. We just have to ask good questions, but we should not assume that we know their lives better than they do. There are tons of examples when it comes to, for example, facial recognition. Just Google it. There are so many examples how that went horribly wrong. Fairly recently, there was a blood pressure measuring device that would not work on people with darker skin tones. There used to be a targeting option for ethnicity on Facebook ads. So people banks would exclude people of color from their campaigns for loans. And there are just a lot of things where people very clearly did not think of anything JEDI related. So to not kind of make those same mistakes, let's look into how we can add some JEDI mind tricks to our own discovery and delivery work. A lot of the time when we think about diversity and inclusion, the first thought is, hiring. That's where you put diversity and inclusion. And that's what all these DEI people do, right? They hire more diverse teams and then everything is going to be better. Well, first of all, we can't just fire everyone and start over. That's just not how it works. And secondly, there's more to it. We need cultural change to improve hiring long-term, have better retention, and create an environment where diverse people feel included and where they want to stay. And as product managers, a lot of the time, we're not actually in the position to hire or fire or change culture on a company level. So what can we do right now? What are the things that we have to unlearn? And what are the new things we should learn to have an impact straight away. The first tool I want to introduce to you is something that a good friend of mine came up with. It's called the Privilege Canvas, and it is a team building canvas workshop that you can run. And it is supposed to help you look at where you are at right now with your team that you have. So it helps you to kind of figure out, okay, what kind of privilege do the people of the team have? Who is already represented? What is not represented? And it's really, really helpful to just make that very clear and be vocal about it. And then we can ask ourselves what impact we have with anything that we build on others. And we can train our empathy and not just forget about things because we just never considered them because it doesn't affect us personally. And with this, we can slowly create a more inclusive environment. And equity and justice do not end up being an afterthought, but they're there from the start. Let's just very, very quickly look into how do we actually build new products or new features. In an ideal world, these should be our steps. We do some discovery, we do some ideation, we come up with a good solution to the problem that we have framed and found out that we want to solve. We probably prototype it in some way or another, validate the idea and assumptions that we have. We build what we came up with, we ship it, then we learn, and then we start over. That's usually how it goes. I know the reality sometimes is a bit different. Maybe you have, a stakeholder give you a feature and then you just have to build it. But in an ideal world, this is how our discovery and delivery should look. So if we look at all of these steps, what are the things we can start with straight away in every single of these steps? How can we make it better? I really like this quote as well, where he said, your focus determines your reality. And in this context, I want to say, if you add JEDI or diversity and equity and inclusion or justice, equity, diversity and inclusion to your practice, then it becomes your reality and it becomes normal. And it's not a lot of effort and like this, oh no, I have to do a big workshop on making sure everything I built is inclusive, but it just becomes part of your process. So when you think about your own process, how you build a product, are all of your steps inclusive? Just think about them for a moment. Do you actually look into your impact that you have with your product or your feature on several dimensions? I want to give you a bunch of questions that you can ask yourself and your team and evaluate together in every single step of the way to a new product if you are being a JEDI. So let's say we'll start with competitor analysis, some market research. Think about what is the impact? Does it maybe have an impact on small local businesses? Does your product have an impact on maybe Black-owned businesses or women-owned businesses? Are you taking, something from another culture? There's a lot around Japanese culture that people get very excited about, but if you take from a culture to use in your product, are you appropriating or are you appreciating? Who are you leaving behind? And just kind of think about what is the worst that could happen when you built this product the way you thought you should. And then we can also look into user research. Who am I talking to? Who am I excluding? It's a bit harder when you recruit for user interviews, when you really focus on being diverse and having a wide representation of people in your interviewees. And there might be other things around it, like accessibility that you also have to take care of. But you're building a product for a diverse group of people, so don't only interview people that look like you and that behave like you and that live in circumstances like your own. This can be small things like if you do in-person interviews, are the facilities where you do the interviews wheelchair accessible? Just one small question. The being fair part is mostly about the compensation for interviews. We're getting so much value out of interviewing people that, it might make us thousands or millions of dollars or pounds or euros. And then we give people $25 gift certificates. Are we really fair? Like, are we compensating for the actual value we're getting? Once we're done with our interviews, a lot of teams create personas. And they're great. They can be super helpful. But often they only represent majorities or fall back onto simplified stereotypes of non-majority groups. Take a close look at your personas and maybe use something else. Personally, I'm a big fan of jobs to be done, where it's less about, this person is this age range, this ethnicity. Like, it doesn't matter. What are they trying to get done? That's what we should look at and help them do. When we're doing ideation and we're coming up with a solution, and maybe you workshop and look around you. Who's in the room? Let's say you have a fairly diverse team and everyone is there ideating with you. Who are the people that we're actually listening to? And once we get to the next step, validation, a lot of the time, I think most of us probably have heard Marty Kagan's risk assessment checkpoints. Like, is this feasible? Is it usable? Is it viable? Is it valuable? Valuable for whom? And maybe we should add to it ethical. Is this ethical? And how you answer this question obviously depends highly on your product and the market you're in. But just asking that question can already surface a lot more than just ignoring it. When we're testing prototypes, again, you want to make sure you have a wider representation of different people in your tester group. Your prototype itself should be accessible. When it comes to accessibility, there are tons of dimensions, having rooms that are wheelchair accessible. I don't know, is the contrast high enough in your prototype? Are there closed captions on your videos? Have you thought about people who are dyslexic or just generally like illiterate? Like, do they have to do a lot of reading for your product? Do you choose to make your product exclusive, like make it a luxury product, make it scarce, make it iOS only that excludes certain people? Do people have to have really good internet access or generally internet access? There are a lot of different dimensions, and I'm not saying you have to do all of them right now perfectly, because we're all humans and that's okay. But you should get started somewhere. One little tip I can give you is go to your landing page or your web application if you have that and use Lighthouse. That's a tool that's already integrated in Chrome and it tells you a lot about performance, but it also has an accessibility score. Just go into your browser, look it up, and see how things are going on your own landing page. And then take, 1, 2, 3 small steps to make it better. So now I need all of your help because I can change the world on my own, and I'm not that delusional. I know that's not possible. We all need to do better, and we all can get started with small things. So just quickly reiterate, we want to design with the people that we're building for and not just for them. Less assumptions. We want to check where we're at and what we're missing within our teams and creating a culture of inclusion. We want to train our empathy so that we really think about other people that are not just us. And we can start little. And I just want you to know that it's more important to get started than to be perfect. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you so much, Lisa. Great job. Really, really excited about some of the thought-provoking stuff that you shared this morning or afternoon. I don't even know what time it is.
Noon?
Noon-ish.
In the middle?
Yeah, it's noonish. All right, so our next speaker is Liz Maslakova, who is the CEO at Wojo and previously worked at Habito. She'll be sharing some thoughts on how to manage your product backlog like an investment portfolio. Take it away, Liz.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I'm just looking at whether I can share my screen. So yeah, I want to talk about the product roadmap, and that's an important part of delivery. So fits into the topic nicely. I'm personally I have a very interesting relationship with finance throughout my career. I have a degree in international finance. I never became an investment banker. Bad for them, not for me. And I've been building digital products and fintech for 6 years. So I'm trying to conflate and kind of use the two disciplines, product management and finance, and see how they can help each other and how concepts from one can be used in another. So today I wanted to talk about an investment analogy and how you can manage your product roadmap like an investment portfolio, and namely diversify it and contextualize its risk profile to the objectives and what you're trying to achieve. So to start with, the investment management is based on a concept of risk-return trade-off. Bear with me if that's familiar to you, but I just pause here for a second to go through it. So the idea is that risk that is concerned here, which is financial risk, the risk of losing the money, correlates directly with how much potential revenue you can, potential gains you can receive on an investment. So imagine you've got 100K pounds. That's a very nice thing to imagine. So go along this journey with me. And you have several options of what to do with it. So you can put it in a bank deposit and earn an interest rate that is normally relatively low, just about the inflation rate in the country and in the currency that you're investing. It's extremely safe, especially if the amount is lower. So the only thing that can happen to your money is that the bank becomes bankrupt, and that's rare, to be fair. And also, even if that happens, part of the money is protected by the government. So a really good example of super low risk, but also super low return, never exceeds the interest rate that you've got on your contract. So as you move up on this graph, you go through bonds and property, and they are high risk, high return. And at the top right corner, you see shares. Let's ignore cryptocurrency for a minute and talk about the more conventional one, shares. So that means you're investing in a company. So if you invest in a company, there are so many factors that come into play, like its own performance, how the market is doing, how even the brand of the company's founders and executives changing. So actually you're betting on many, many things at once, and your 100K can suddenly become 1,000 or even 0. But also that's almost the only way to turn your 100K into $1 million, because that's what companies do. They multiply, they find business models, and then they multiply your investment. So in a similar way, in product features, in product roadmap items, there is kind of a similar angle to look at it. So the lowest risk and the lowest return item is fixing something in your core product funnel. You may have lots of data that says that customers are dropping off here, and they may even give you feedback as to why they're dropping off at a particular point. And it's usually a relatively quick fix. And you can do that, but the extent to what you're going to gain with it is limited by the number of people who actually come to this point of the journey. And eventually you'll get limited by developer position, the pricing, and other things. So then the new feature is a more risky one. A full information architecture revamp of an app is an even riskier one. And then on the extreme of this scale is a completely new product for the same or a new segment. And again, like in shares, so many things can go wrong. There is no need for this product. You miscalculated some technical assumptions, but also if you did have the right hunch, you can actually have a very nice uplift in your metrics and revenues. So to take a case study of Voyager, Voyager is a digital career coach, and we start, the user journey starts with a short survey. So we ask a few questions, and one of them is, what's your dream job? And then we were asking a few more questions about the dream job, like what function it's in, what kind of modality is it a full-time, etc. And we saw people putting free text that I don't know my dream job yet, I'm figuring it out, and also dropping off at the additional questions. So very straightforward, clear data that this needs to be fixed. We fixed it, we introduced a question whether you know your dream job in the first place, and if the customer said no, we just didn't ask any other questions. That gave us an uplift of 10% for the overall onboarding conversion, but also this 10% is limited by how many people end up on this step of the journey in the first place, right? So they need to come to the website, decide to sign up, go through the previous steps of onboarding, and that's only the thing that we are optimizing. Low risk, but limited return. On the other extreme, the high risk, high return is a change that we are now implementing. We looked at our data and we saw that some of our customers are more likely to use the digital-only product as opposed to human coaching. So we realized that the human coaching we initially were proposing is more relevant for people who are in mid-30s and midlife career change. So successful professionals who are afraid to lose something and affluent enough to go to a human coach and pay for it. That's a really nice segment. So we continue looking at how to serve it, but our business model is based on digital coaching. So we now investigated who are these people who want the digital coaching first, and they are more likely to be early in their career journey, Generation Z, demographic-wise, and now we are rebuilding the narrative and messaging around the product to resonate more with this audience. So that's a bigger change that involves more work, and it's also a slightly riskier one because we don't know a few things about this generation. We haven't researched them before, so we actually need to start testing it now as we go. But if we do that, the profits that are based on a cost-free digital-only product are much more interesting than the human-based coaching. And I talked a little bit about the effort in the previous slides, that the bigger change, the bigger risk change is also the chunkier one to deliver, but actually they're not exactly the same. They're a little bit correlated because when something is bigger effort and it takes longer time to deliver, the risk increases as a result because the market can change while you're building the feature. Customers may no longer want it. It may have been something time-boxed, or your competitors may have built it and already adopted the customers that you were aiming for. So it is sometimes correlated, but actually risk is a third dimension that you can use. And you can use to prioritize specifically between some of the items on this matrix. You probably use this matrix a lot. The yellow ones are a no-brainer. You do the easy wins, you don't do the money pit. But the green ones are the ones that are difficult to kind of balance and prioritize between. And that's where risk may come into play. So the process I follow usually is, again, the same as for an investment portfolio. You balance, and to balance, you diversify. So it's good to have both the big bets and the incremental gains in your quarterly or yearly roadmap. And you can't just have the incremental gains. They are safe, they are small, but also everyone on the market probably has the same ideas and the same data as you do, and it's going to be just a catch-up game, and it never is going to bring some defensible competitive advantage. So you do need some big bets, but you can't form the roadmap just of the big bets because they are risky. So 1 out of 3 or 1 out of 5 may fall through. And what you end up having is a whole quarter of your metric not moving, your stakeholders being not quite satisfied, and more importantly, your own team and you not being motivated. So you actually need some smaller incremental things to make sure you kind of keep the lights on in your team, but also some bigger bets to eventually gain that competitive advantage over the market. And as you balance, the average risk of your portfolio, of your roadmap, kind of becomes a sort of median or like a weighted risk. But this weighted risk can also move along the scale. So again, like an investment portfolio, you can build it out of deposits and bonds, and you can build it out of shares and crypto. They're both going to be balanced, but on a different side of the scale. And as an investment advisor, the first thing one would do is ask the person who invests what the objective of the portfolio is. Are there any savings and any cushion to protect if it doesn't perform? And what kind of experience does the investor have? And we can ask similar questions for your product roadmap and your product risk profile. So when I join a new team to understand the risk appetite, I ask the following questions. First, is the product a cash cow for the company? So does it generate revenues consistently over time that the company depends on? Does it actually keep the lights on in the company? So if suddenly something happened to it, would the company be insolvent or in some kind of trouble? If that's the case, it's very likely a low risk roadmap. So you need to still balance it, but around a relatively low risk profile items. And then the next question is kind of related. Is the product mature? And you can gauge that by knowing whether the product has a product market fit, has enough data to understand the next steps, enough customers using it, and also the metrics, the KPIs for this product are already quite sensible and it's incremental growth. So it's probably going to be medium risk. So the opposite of the mature products I had with the life insurance at my previous company. So as I joined, the uptake was very close to 0%, and it was aimed to reach 30% by the end of the year. So that's a very good example of it being not mature yet, probably on the higher risk side of scale. And then the other two questions that correlate with high risk is whether the product is branded as venture, and you just need to look for the language that's used about it. Does your team have new products, venture, innovation in its name? Or does it look like an accelerator? So you actually, as a product manager, you balance several products at the same time. If it does look like this incubator, it's probably a super high risk because all these products are quite nascent. And then a more rare one is whether the product is at a make or break stage. That's usually when there have been some hypotheses that's been tested and maybe failed, and now pretty much everyone is thinking that, okay, we try one more quarter and then we give up. It may be bad news, but it may be also a very fun thing to do because as a product manager, you can try quite wild things. You don't have anything to lose, literally. And it's important to know this risk profile and communicate it to your stakeholders back and forth. So what often happens is the product scope falls into one of these buckets, but the stakeholder prioritization decisions don't match with them. So it's good to know what the difference in decision making is. So for low risk, normally you have lots of available data because the product is mature, and it's easy to model and calculate the impact, but also the potential risk. So what is the scale of change that this feature is going to produce? And then you also usually can do some kind of phased rollout. You have enough data to and enough users to roll out first 10% and then something else, A/B test, and have some quant data to support your decisions. If it's a high risk, non-mature product, usually you have little to no data. You need to rely much more on your own intuition and your stakeholders' intuition, and you have much more qual research and qual testing over quant one. And if you come to a product that you may not be completely aligned with in terms of the risk appetite, you can actually change it as well. So, for example, I worked at a large bank, and my product portfolio was responsible for 30% of the P&L of the bank. And that's the cash cow example. And the product was quite mature, the market share was quite big, and my goal was basically to keep the market share and all the numbers as is. Don't move it, just don't lose it. And it was not an ambitious enough challenge for me, so I wanted to rock the boat a little bit. And what I did is I looked for the competitive challenge out there. So first of all, I built a case to say, in order to even preserve the market share, we need to be aware of what our competitors are doing. And we've all realized that our competitors were very keen to take our chunky market share by disrupting and by building some very innovative things. So that helped me to create the kind of the drama and convince the stakeholders that we need to make bigger bets as well, while obviously protecting the cash cow bit. And then the other way to do that is also to look outside of your current segment or your product. So whatever your product is doing, it can continue doing that, but actually there may be an adjacent market or an adjacent problem that your solution can be solving, and that can be a lever for a very nice and quick growth for the company. And again, there is usually a stakeholder in the company, maybe not your direct one, who can be excited by it. So you can always find a way to move your product up the risk scale if you want. And the opposite works as well. So it can be that your stakeholders or yourself are not super confident with not super comfortable with the high risk product and living in complete uncertainty and always trusting only your intuition or qualitative data. And you'll probably need to deal with it for a while because it takes time to get data and to get users. But what you can use in this case is the riskiest assumption test framework. So instead of going for safe bets and anything obvious, you start with the assumption that is underlying in your whole product's business model. So if it's not correct, so if it's not validated, the whole product won't work. And you test that, you move to the next one because the next one is going to be less risky. And this way you get more data and less uncertainty. So in the Voyager example, we have started with the assumption that people will use digital coaching in the first place. And we saw from our data that there are people using digital coaching, but there is a segment as well that was our primary one to start with, but they were less interested in that and more interested in human coaching. So we've tested that, and now we are moving to the next assumption that we can build an appealing and relevant narrative for this segment that we identified for the digital coaching. And once we do that, we'll probably have the next one to test something related to retention or monetization. But we move step by step each time the riskiest assumption. And that's all from me. So if that resonates with you as an approach, 3 main things to think about. Gauge your product risk profile, where it sits now. Think if you want to move it and what you can do to move it. Wherever it is, make sure you diversify your roadmap so that's balanced and gives you the sense of progress. And always talk about your risk profile and your product decision-making related to it with your stakeholders. You don't always need to use the word risk or something, but just try to find a way to align the 2 things together. And that's it. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you so much, Liz. What a thought-provoking talk on managing investments and thinking about how you pull up your perspective and think about the difference between discovery and delivery and make concentrated efforts. I hope we see some really great questions from that.
Thank you.
And last but not least, our final speaker for today is Daniel Merriman, who is a product management consultant currently working with teaching.com. Dan is going to talk to us a little bit about the overlap between sociology and product management. Super excited for this one. Take it away, Dan.
Thanks very much, Eli, and thank you again to everyone who is listening in here today. I want to talk about why product managers should care about sociology. But first, I'd like to take us back a few steps by asking what I think is really quite a simple question, which is, what is the purpose of product managers? Indeed, if I were being really uncharitable, I might ask what is the point of product managers? Because we're not essential to the product development process, despite what we might like to think. We're not essential like engineers are essential, the people who actually write the code and build the app or the website. We're also not essential like designers are essential, the people whose vision and skill turn our products into something appealing that users understand and enjoy using. In the history of product development, thousands of products, both digital and analog, have been launched successfully into the world without the input of someone called the product manager. So, what are we for? The value of a product manager, I would argue, is that there is at least one person whose responsibility it is to ensure that we are building the right product at the right time and for the right reasons. That's their purpose, their reason for being. Many organizations sadly conflate the role with project management or diminish their scope to that of a feature broker, as Marty Kagan say, trading development time among stakeholders to ensure that everybody feels like they're making a contribution. When organizations fall into this trap, things won't necessarily fall apart, not right away at least, but there will inevitably follow a nagging sense that opportunities are being missed, that insights are going unexplored, and that there's this real lack of focus on what truly matters. By contrast, however, you may have been fortunate enough to witness an organization where a skilled product manager has earned the space, and I say earned because product managers are rarely given this opportunity freely, to ply their trade to its fullest extent. When an effective product manager is baked into the product development process, you have a person whose job it is to be the undisputed expert in your users and how they engage with your product. They will tell you who your users are, what problems each group is trying to solve. They will challenge assumptions, push back on initiatives driven by bias, and pursue meaningful data with a religious zeal. They provide the direction, a North Star to steer by, and a strong, compelling narrative that tells everyone around you that this is the story of our product and how we can make the lives of our users better. So far, so straightforward. Given today's audience, I doubt that much of what I've said so far is especially controversial. And yet I can't help but feel like our skills are being wasted. So, listen to me using the passive voice, our skills are being wasted. Let me be more explicit. We are wasting our skills. Or if wasting is too strong a word, we are at least misusing them. As a discipline, as an industry, we talk a lot about building products that our users love. But what do we really mean by this? Is it really love that we're talking about? Some sort of deep mutual connection that we feel in our soul? A passionate commitment to each other's happiness? A bond forged in shared affection and hopes for the future? Is this what we're doing with the products that we spend 5 days out of 7 working to improve, making more appealing, championing to the world? Maybe it is. Or maybe, when we talk about building products that users love, what we're trying to do is justify our product's existence. If we can build products that users engage with or spend money on, or that fundamentally change the way people think about the world and their place in it, then we can tell ourselves that those are good reasons for the product to exist and that we, as product people, have done our job well. And we have done our job well. We've used our skills to achieve our product goals. But are achievements like these making the world a better place? Do we need yet another productivity app gamifying our existence? Is humanity best served by online checkouts optimized to increase cart value? Is disrupting local housing markets or inventing new forms of precarious labor or meme-based currencies built on environmental Armageddon? Are these really the best ways we can come up with to spend our time? This may all sound hopelessly naive. and remind you of how Kenneth Bowles describes the problem in his book, Future Ethics. Quote, "The idea that a rank-and-file technologist can change the culture of a large firm, let alone the industry, reminds me of a lovesick teenager's desperate attempts to heal a difficult partner. A generous, but ultimately doomed act that saps emotional energy." End quote. And actually, I don't disagree with this, as sad as it sounds. But I do think that sociology and bringing a sociological lens to our product practice can help us navigate such tricky terrain. Now, Auguste Comte called sociology the scientific study of society. Emile Durkheim, another distinguished sociologist, said that sociology is the study of social facts, such as norms, values, and institutions. George Simmel said it was a framework for understanding social groups through their interactions, and Pierre Bourdieu saw sociology as a way to explore the power dynamics between people. One of my favorite definitions, though, is from David Newman's book, Exploring the Architecture of Everyday Life. And he says, quote, "Sociology is a liberating perspective. It forces us to look at the social processes that influence our thoughts, perceptions, and actions, and helps us see how social change occurs and the impact we can have on others." End quote. The role of a sociologist, then, is to bring rigor to humanity's efforts to understand the myriad relationships between a person and their wider social world, to articulate those intangible power dynamics of social groups and their real-world consequences, and to challenge the assumption of social behavior being somehow natural or inherent to our being. For a sociologist, our world and everything in it is socially constructed and reconstructed by the interplay of social relationships. And to think like a sociologist means to search for the context behind the choices that we make and the things that we do. Not only this, it trains us to think in terms of social action and social consequence, and of the costs and benefits to our wider social worlds. For a product manager, someone whose value lies in building actionable insight into the people who use their product, could any way of thinking be more useful? Could any skill set be more practical than that of a sociologist? Someone who is trained in both research and critical thinking to look beyond the assumptions of who people are and what they do and dig into the why. This is product discovery 101. And yet, when was the last time you saw a product job description that listed a sociology degree as a requirement rather than computer science or business? Now, it's possible that so far you're not entirely convinced by my argument about the value of sociology for product managers, and this is totally okay. You're product managers after all, you shouldn't just be taking my word for it. So here's an example of the application of sociological discovery in the real world. Imagine New York City. Picture it in your mind, this vast, sprawling metropolis of 8 million people, rich and poor, young and old, residents, tourists, full of homes, businesses, that famous skyline, of course, traffic, the subway network, power cables, sewage systems, mail delivery, hospitals, schools, and countless other networks and interconnections. Think of all the relationships in this city, all those social groups, all the interplays of power and status. When we think of the real world, it doesn't get much more real than this. And if it were a product, it would be the most complex product imaginable. How on earth would you start prioritizing a backlog for a city? How would you even begin to understand how your users engage with your product or understand their needs? It turns out, though, that we can do precisely this. Apparently chaotic at first glance and perhaps even second glance, through the right framing, a kind of underlying structure emerges from beneath the surface. And this is what sociologist William White describes in his 1980 study on the social life of small urban spaces. Observing the city streets and plazas, White saw that certain spaces in the city were more successful than others, using criteria for success that would be familiar to any product manager. Do people visit it? Do they return? Do they spend time there? Do they bring their friends? Are they happy? And could they be happier? If you are a product manager, these are some of the fundamental questions you are asking every day about your users and their relationship with your product. So, what was it about these spaces that made them so successful? For White, there were 3 fundamental features above all others that made it for a successful public place. First, there must be plentiful seating. The seating would ideally be movable, but if not, then there should be scope for personal choice. steps proving especially popular as they allowed the visitor to select what level they wish to sit at. Second, there must be access to light, and preferably sunlight or natural light. Warmth was less of a concern, but as public spaces fell into shade, there was a significant decline in their success. Lastly, the space must be open to the surrounding area. The most successful spaces allowed a wanderer to enter simply by stepping off the sidewalk. And that was it. Those were the three factors that made the difference between an area of the city that attracted thousands of people every day and an area 2 minutes away of similar construction that might see a handful of passers-by. The lesson here for product people is one that we often forget or make exceptions for, that a product that does a small number of things that meet a genuine user need will outperform a less focused product with a poor value proposition. What's even more insightful, perhaps, is what we learn about spaces that are unsuccessful. Features that might be considered attractive or a source of protection from the roads or traffic, like sculpted hedgerows, ornate iron fencing, and leafy foliage, often made a place less appealing because they felt more closed off and thus less safe. Water features, too, were a precarious addition. They could be a benefit, but often they caused seating areas to become damp or unusable, or strict rules concerning their use meant users were unable to cool their feet on a hot summer's day. Other controlling behavior, like adding sharp stones or metal spikes to ledges to prevent dawdlers or rough sleepers, was equally damaging. Product managers listening here today will recall other examples of misguided attempts to improve products that drove users away, or how poorly assertions of control over the use of a product were received by otherwise committed communities. I mentioned earlier that one of the great strengths of sociology and its value to product managers is its capacity for providing context for human action. When White looked at the public spaces in New York City, he also saw a fascinating example of what happens when decisions are taken on the basis of poorly understood behavior. When city officials noted that people like to congregate in certain popular plazas, they came to the conclusion that this was a good thing, and were worried about the availability of these spaces as the city became more crowded and the demand for high-density buildings like skyscrapers left open space at a premium. So far, so good. The city's product managers have identified a key feature for the success of their product, and they've also spotted a risk. To deal with this problem, they imposed a planning restriction on all new skyscrapers, limiting the buildings to far below their desired number of stories. They then provided an incentive to the development companies. They could have those extra stories on their new buildings, but only if they included open space for the public at ground level. For every X square feet at ground level dedicated to open space, they could add Y further stories to their skyscraper, where every extra story represents a potentially huge financial benefit to that developer. And taken at face value, this seems like an eminently sensible solution. It provides a compelling incentive to encourage behavior from users that we believe will lead to desirable outcomes. And many of us would make a similar decision when developing our own products without a second's hesitation. But, of course, there's something missing. We've already learned that there are reasons why some spaces are socially successful. Places to sit, access to sunlight, and openness with easy transitions from the sidewalk. This was the context that White had identified, and without this insight, the incentives were doomed to fail. Enormous plazas sprung up around the city as property developers responded to the initiative, but they remained stubbornly empty and unused. There was no seating. The plazas were often in the shade from the enormous skyscrapers next to them, and fences and security guards discouraged public access. That investment was made to improve their product, but the features went ignored and unloved by users. Context is critical. I hope by now that even if you don't think product managers should care about sociology in an academic sense, you'll at least see the benefit that thinking sociologically or through a social lens can have on your product practice. So I want to share 3 questions you can ask yourself to help bring sociological insight the next time you're performing product discovery. Am I looking at a symptom or a cause? The city planners who encouraged property developers to build these enormous plazas thought they were doing the right thing. but made that classic product mistake of confusing the output for the outcome. Features are not the goal, user benefit is, and it's our responsibility, even in organizations that see us as project wranglers or feature brokers, to ensure that we're doing the right thing at the right time for the right reasons. And when I say right here, I don't mean in convenient or profitable, I mean it in the moral sense, to do the right thing at the right time for the right reasons. Is this decision for my benefit or my users? I spoke earlier about the inclusion of deliberate obstacles to discourage people from using spaces in the way they wanted. And in our product work, we can sometimes find ourselves being similarly controlling about user behavior. And we should ask ourselves, am I making these decisions because I truly believe it will benefit my users? Or is this simply to make my life easier, to prevent me from having to do deep reflection on my motivations or from asking difficult questions about my values? What biases am I carrying with me that I'm not acknowledging? Is my product genuinely making life better for people? Is my personal ambition blinding my judgment about right and wrong? What social consequences am I overlooking or rationalizing away? Who is missing from my assumptions? The architects who added hedgerows and gates to those public spaces would have been far less surprised about their failure if only they'd spoken to more women. The fear of mugging and harassment that such enclosed spaces brought was a repeated theme in White's research. So, when you're building your next feature and you're listing your assumptions, which as I'm sure we all do, read that list again. Ask women, people of color, people with mobility issues or other disabilities, what are you missing? Pay them for their time, by the way. It could not only save you a fortune in wasted effort, but prevent unintentional, but no less real, harm. When we rely on empathy rather than inclusion, or some of those JEDI metrics we heard about earlier, it's so easy to miss systemic issues that our products either fail to account for at best, or at worst, actively reinforce. I want to end now by returning to Kenneth Bowles and his comparison of the individual technologist, trying to change an industry as the hopeless endeavors of a lovesick teenager, idealism ground into dust. Now, this may be a depressing image, but he also offers us a way forward, with concrete changes we can make to our practice. He encourages us to think of society as a stakeholder, and to appreciate the social contract that we make with the wider community when we release our products into the world. We have a responsibility to think of future generations, not just the next release. I believe that sociology provides us with a liberating perspective on the world, and I hope it will help you liberate your product practice. Thank you very much.
Cool. Thank you so much, Dan. Really appreciate it. We're going to bring our panel back and we'll start to take questions from the audience. Thank you so much to all of you for sharing some really wonderful thoughts. We're going to go straight into Q&A. And I know we've talked about some pretty heady and big themes. So I wanted to start by asking Liz a little bit more about how you've balanced product discovery and delivery, and maybe touch on a little bit of stakeholder management in that.
Yeah, good question. So one thing that I like related to delivery and discovery balancing is the dual track agile. So basically assuming that there is always some discovery at the same time as delivery happening, because in order for things to be ready for delivery, you need to have enough of a discovery upfront, because that's how the cycle works. So one way to look at it in the roadmap, you'll probably know about the now, next, later, for me has been to put in the next column the things that are actually already happening, but in discovery or data gathering. So they already have some visibility for stakeholders and some attention from mainly the product manager, the designer, and sometimes the analyst. And also the engineers know that this is coming. They can start coming up with questions to the designer, and the prototypes are being kind of pre-groomed in grooming sessions, not like exactly turned into tickets. So yes, that's been my process. I think it's probably very kind of straightforward, but the quick answer is just everything is always happening at the same time, and you always have engineers to be hands-on on delivery, and you almost always have a designer to be day-to-day in discovery. And as a product manager, you're kind of picking whatever ball is dropping most, and that's your focus for the day or for the week.
Cool. Lisa, same question. How are you balancing product delivery and discovery right now?
Yeah, I think it's important to not see them as two separate things, because I feel like we're all pretty good with continuous delivery because we've all been doing this for so long, and it's, that's the thing. And we forget continuous discovery. So it feels more like, oh, I do discovery right now, and then I deliver continuously for the rest of my life, like that. So I think just making sure you do both at all times, making it into a habit to, talk to 2 people every week. So it's just kind of, it never stops. I think that helps. And I totally second what Liz said about putting it on your roadmap, making it visible. It is part of your product work. It's not like, oh, our product work is only the features that we're delivering, but doing discovery should just be as visible.
And finally, Daniel, same question. Tell us a little bit about how you're balancing discovery and delivery right now.
Sure. I mean, just to add on to what everyone else has already said, I'm always it always brings me to mind the that list that John Cutler shares periodically of things that feel fast and things that are fast. And one of the things I'm a big advocate, if I can get my words out, advocate for is serializing work rather than focusing too much on parallelization. I think that's definitely a trap I've fallen into in the past of, oh, if I try and do a bunch of different things at once, then actually, that feels like I'm making a bunch of progress. But rather, I like to involve my whole team. So that includes customer success, our engineers, designers, and we collaborate on discovery. I mean, as product manager, it's my job to kind of own that and make sure it's happening and make sure everyone is fully involved, and there's some kind of systematic approach to that. And I really like the point about giving over some time during the week to have those regular conversations with your users. So for myself, like, that is basically my whole Friday. I allow my users to just put time in my calendar so I can be talking to them every week. And I don't think there's a better use of my time, frankly, but certainly making sure the entire team is involved in that and having that as a serial process rather than trying to parallelize it too much is how I try and balance that approach.
Cool. Next question is for Liz. How do you balance your resources and efforts based on the risk appetite graph that you shared?
Yeah, so to give an example, I would usually start to understand what kind of risk appetite there is in my product. And let's assume it's a mature product and a low risk appetite. And then the usual impact effort graph comes into play, and you always do the easy wins. There is kind of no questions asked. So in the case of a low risk appetite, I would mix up the easy wins with the incremental gains, maybe something like 80-20, 80 for the easy wins, because that's what actually gets you some tangible advantage rather than kind of incremental quick fixes. And then with big bets, that's probably where I would focus my discovery, trying to focus as little time of my development team, because I know that for a low risk appetite product, the stakeholders wouldn't want to bet on these big bets until they become easy wins. So you actually, through discovery, through some very kind of lo-fi experiments, data gathering, and breaking it down into smaller features, you can get them into easy wins. And that's how you, maybe in the next quarter, prioritize them eventually.
Does either Lisa or Dan want to weigh in on that and talk a little bit about balancing risk appetite?
I'm just to, I guess, reiterate what has already been said there. I think it kind of depends on not just the nature of the product itself, but also your preferred skill set as a product person, right? I think there are going to be some product managers who specialize far more in more conservative with a small c products, right? Where actually you are seen as a steady pair of hands and your job is to maintain the balance of the product. And that's a perfectly legitimate approach, right? I think we heard earlier about working at a bank where, you know, that's an environment where you're not expected to be taking enormous risks or making radical UX changes and so forth, and that's perfectly legitimate. So I think it's understanding what you as a product person's strengths and preferences are, right? Like that should be something that feeds into your decisions about where you work and what approach you want to take to your product practice.
Yeah, I can just only agree. I've worked in a company where we had two products. One of them was quite mature and had to be stable because it was a lending solution, while the other one was still very experimental. And you take very different types of risk depending on your product.
Cool. Our next question is a little bit more towards Lisa's talk about safety, but I think one of the things that is important about workplace safety and psychological safety is that it can help us have better discussions about balancing risk. So how do you create safety in your work environment for those conversations about the trade-offs between discovery and delivery?
Yeah, there are a lot of small things, and I think one of the most important parts is listening. And I don't mean listening to respond, but just listening. It's really hard sometimes, but really listen to the people around you, ask questions to understand them even better, and give them the space that they need. It's something that takes time. You will never create safety and trust like within a couple of days in a team usually. So give it some time as well. Don't get too impatient with yourself, but listen to what the people need and create spaces. I have had teams where certain people, they just felt very uncomfortable in larger groups, and that meant more than 3 people. So they would never really say anything in retros. So I knew that they did have good feedback and important feedback to share. So I would just ask them to go grab a coffee every now and then, before or after we had a retro, and give that person that specific space that they needed.
Dan or Liz, anything to build on that?
I just wanted to add, one more thing that maybe that's me as a Russian, and you can see the flag speaking, but kind of provoking small conflicts, not provoking, but diffusing sometimes through super kind of small tensions before they become something big, is what I found useful. And my mentor once taught me that I always still feel quite uneasy when a conflict happens, because I never know, is it a bad thing, and it's stressful. So my mentor taught me, so after you leave the meeting, you ask yourself a question: will this person raise this opinion again if this situation to be repeated? And if the answer is yes, it means the environment is actually safe. So it's just a safe environment, even if it's a heated discussion, to voice your opinions. And I really liked it as an advice. So I think it's important not to just like walk on eggshells, but to create these tensions and diffuse them.
Dan, do you have anything to add?
Just to add on top of what's already been said again, the approach that I always like to try and take is modeling integrity, if that's not too nebulous a term. I think as product people, we are quite a suspicious bunch of phrases of those ways of thinking about it. And so we're often quite, I think, skeptical of broader motivations. We need to be convinced that what we're doing is the right thing, that we are not being led along the garden path and in some kind of political hefflump trap. So we need to be modeling the behavior that we want to see, and that means being honest, being consistent, being open. Like I'm quite happy to admit that I consistently ask really obvious, dumb questions, and I will continue to do that consistently, the most rudimentary questions, because I feel like if I can't make myself look a little bit silly, if I can't be asking these questions, I can't possibly expect any of my team to be putting themselves out there and making themselves vulnerable. So I try to be the first person to ask the stupid question, because that can open up things up and make people feel a little bit safer. So that's the approach I would take.
Yeah,
So,
maybe just one tiny more thing. Sorry. I think it's also really, really helpful to just get to know everyone as people and not just as coworkers. Just take some time. What I do with my team, every single meeting, we do a 3-minute icebreaker where we just share something. And it can be like, our favorite TV show. Or I think someone the other day asked, like, what's your earliest childhood memory? So it got deep over the course of a year and a half with that team. But yeah, just ask questions. Be interested in the people you work with.
Our next question is, what tips would you have for B2B product managers doing discovery in that B2B relationship? Let's start with Liz. You have a prior, wait, no.
I do, yes. I worked at Bond as a B2B product. So, and in a way at Habit as well, because we worked with brokers at some point. So I guess my key learning is that you always have your salespeople, or whatever they're called, business development people, who will see the B2B clients as their kind of remit, and that's normal because they actually own the relationship. And it's great if the product culture is so developed that you can go and directly speak to these clients, and you should always advocate for that because you need first-hand call data, and you're the ones who know how to ask questions. But also, if it's still not the case, your salespeople is your voice of the customer. So I think kind of taking it for granted and making the most out of what your salespeople bring you as insights has been my main learning, and kind of not putting it in the waste basket, because there is a depth of very valuable knowledge there.
Fair. Anyone else?
I guess, make the broader point about the distinction between being in a B2B relationship or B2C or whichever. I think for product people, it's just really important to kind of know who you are as a product person and what your approach is, and to sort of own that. I think there is a bit of a potential trap to fall into of trying to adapt your approach or your mentality too much depending on which kind of business relationships you're in. I think there's sort of some fundamental truths to who you are as a product person that you should try and maintain rather than trying to be kind of over adaptive to the situation you're in. So that's the kind of larger point I would make.
Cool. Next question, a little bit more broadly, what challenges have you had with dual track Agile? And are there any anti-patterns a product manager should watch for?
I think it's probably what I already mentioned, to just kind of forget about one of the two tracks, which is often discovery. That gets kind of like, oh yeah, discovery, right, we should do that. I'll do that later. And just getting caught up in the day-to-day, like just not making the time. My calendar usually looks kind of wild because I block off chunks in different colors for different things I'm doing, just so that I really take the time. That's something that has helped me. So not making time would be the anti-pattern here.
I would probably add just one thing on the completely other side of the scale, where discovery and takes up everything and everyone's so on board with it. So the anti-pattern I've experienced is involving engineers too much in the process and too early, because sometimes it's just an idea and it will leave for one day, and they happen to attend a specific meeting where this idea was being discussed, and they take it for granted as it's going to be happening potentially, and they need to develop a solution that caters for this possibility, and that makes your whole architecture and technical discussions much more difficult. So like it's super important for them to know what the customers are thinking, but sometimes it may be overloading for engineers to know every single thing in discovery.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And just to say as well, you have a strategy, presumably, as a product person. You've done discovery over a period of time. My feeling is that you should, unless it's an incredibly compelling idea, it's going to like completely change the market you're in, or whatever it is, change the world for your product. You shouldn't be changing your product strategy over the course of just one meeting or one bit of insight from a customer. And that can be hard, because sometimes it's you're in a position where perhaps your CEO has had that conversation and now they have this fantastic idea. I think as a product person, that puts you in a very difficult position. But to kind of try and remind people of that broader strategy that is based on a lot of learnings over a longer period of time, I think is helpful.
That is a great segue onto our next question, which is, how do you handle the HIPPO effect, especially when it can distract from your current focus area? Let's start with Lisa.
Yeah, I would say challenge. I know when I first started out, it's a lot harder, and the more experience you gain, the easier it gets, but it also very much depends on the person that you're talking to. But challenge what they're saying and ask them, how does this connect to our strategy? How does this connect to the bigger business goals? If we say yes to this, what are we saying no to? Have those trade-off conversations and be very transparent, because nobody can do everything, and maybe that thing is more important. Have evidence for why the focus area makes sense and will move the needle on whatever your goal is at that time. And yeah, just challenge those people. Just because they make more money doesn't mean that they're smarter.
Cool. And then finally, Dan, how do you handle competing sociological product decisions? How do you decide what's a truer interpretation?
I mean, I appreciate this is the last question, so I'll try not to waffle on for too long. But essentially, without going too far into postmodernism and so forth, like I don't think there is necessarily like one true interpretation when we're looking at data, when we're looking at these kinds of insights. I think this is where it comes to, partly it's down to your own judgment as a product person. Like when you're asking yourself these questions, which I outlined at the end, who's missing from these conversations? Am I doing the right thing at the right time for the right reasons? Those are the questions that should be guiding your decisions. And I think people broadly know what the right thing is in a lot of situations. But if you don't know, bring people on board who can help you make that decision, right? And it's, I would plug Kenneth Ball's book on future ethics as well, because he goes into a lot of practical advice about this. But certainly bringing people on board who are better placed to answer these kinds of questions would be very valuable and probably the best place to start.
Cool. Two more quick questions and then we're going to wrap up. One is on quantifying risk. Would you tell us a little bit about how you do that, Liz? And then we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. So I think the important thing to know in like this risk framework is that you usually deal with very different data that's difficult to compare directly. So I wouldn't recommend doing a similar thing to an investment bank and building like a whole spreadsheet that quantifies it, because it may lead to like paralysis analysis. But I think it's good to maybe assess the confidence level, because the risk is basically how much unknown is in it, how confident are we? And that can be a simple estimation, same as effort impact. And if you want to have a more informed confidence estimation, you can even map the knowns unknowns as a first exercise, so that everyone who shares their confidence level knows that, okay, this is what we're basing it on. Here is the quant data we've collected, the call data, the market research, and all that. So that would be my recommendation.
Cool. And then there was a specific question to Lisa about the privilege canvas that you shared in your talk. Do you have a resource to that somewhere?
Yes, I do. So it is from my friends at the Six Consulting. Perfect. James has already shared it on Twitter, I think. Also, I shared my deck with a bunch more resources on Twitter and on LinkedIn. You can find me at Lisa Mo Wagner. Am I allowed to do this here? Anyways, so you can find me there. I shared all the stuff. I have a bunch of really cool resources, and this canvas is just really, really cool.
Cool. Well,
I think we can probably drop it in the comments on the YouTube video.
Yeah. Well, thank you to all of you, and thank you to James for being our tech today and keeping us on track. So much to learn, so much to really be thinking about as product people today. There's tons of ways to keep the conversation going. There is a 24-hour networking room, and maybe James can plug some of those other things that I can't remember right now.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, folks. Yeah, head to worldproductday.com and get involved in all the bits for World Product Day, and mindtheproduct.com is where you can get involved with all things Product Tank and Mind the Product the rest of the year. So yeah, thank you very much, Eli, Dan, Liz, Lisa. Fantastic talks, and thanks everyone else. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.